Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here today with you. If you open up a newspaper in the United States, you would see headlines about some of the same issues that are facing Europe. Syria, the Middle East. Many of my colleagues at the Freeman Spogli Institute are trying to understand what's happening in the Middle East. But today I want to talk to you about an issue that you would see in American newspapers if you read a little bit further. And it's an issue not unfamiliar in Europe as well. It's an issue of immigration. These are people being sworn in and becoming citizens in the United States. Now, this issue is not unknown in Europe because whether you're talking about immigration within the European Union across countries or to the European Union, the issue is complicated by the fact that when a country welcomes somebody into their fold, they're welcoming somebody into their labor market but also into their national family. That complicates the conversation. In the United States, the experience we've had with immigration is an extraordinary one. The country has been known as a high immigration country for many, many years. And the US immigration system has had a mixed record nonetheless. In one respect, you could say the US system is generous. It admits about 1 million people a year legally. It admits the highest number of resettled refugees anywhere in the world. It welcomes people who become entrepreneurs, including some of the people President Hennessy alluded to. The American system is nonetheless also extraordinarily cumbersome. Almost anybody who experiences it is frustrated with it, has created a huge undocumented population. All I want to do today is to give you a few basic facts about what the experience in the United States has been with immigration in the last few years. This graph tells you something pretty striking. It shows you that the United States is one of the few advanced industrialized countries in the world with a growing population. Now, as a matter of global prosperity, it's not obvious that one wants the world population to grow. It's another issue whether one can control that. But if you're an advanced industrialized country with an aging population, a growing population can be a very good thing. Just ask Japan. Current projections suggest that in Japan, by the year 2050, the modal age will be 70. So the issue of the ratio of the working population to the retired population is a big deal. And in some respects, you could say that the US has something of a superpower, and that is the power to integrate immigrants, to welcome a very large number of immigrants, and to have that be a sustained policy over time. Here's an example of how that's beginning to change the United States. Given the laws the US has in place, in 1980, the US had 6.2% of its population be foreign-born. By 2010, that percentage was 12.9%. Now, it's interesting to note that this doesn't just change the number of immigrants, but also the demographics of the country. So here's a striking statistic. In just 20 years, between 1989 and 2009, the Asian population in the US increased 5-fold. Now, not all this increase in population involves legal immigration. So this is a striking graph too, and it gives you the range of the undocumented population. Obviously, it's difficult to know exactly how large the undocumented population is. But the best estimates done by the Pew Hispanic Center suggest that by 2007, the US had about 12 million unlawful immigrants. You'd think that most of them come across the border with no inspection, but strikingly enough, about 45% of them enter the US initially with a visa and then choose to stay. This is a complicated thing. On the one hand, you could say undocumented immigration is a fact of life. Many Americans hire undocumented workers to work in their homes. On the other hand, if you're police and you're trying to build strong relationships with immigrant communities, to try to prevent terrorism, to try to enforce laws, it becomes much more difficult to do so if the population believes that you're going to enforce immigration laws. What about removing this population? The best estimate suggests that it would cost about $250 billion to do so. It's not likely to happen. As the undocumented population has increased, something interesting has happened to the nature of the politics of the immigration issue. Immigration has gone from being an issue that people talk about behind closed doors, that elites bargain about in Congress, to being an issue of mass public concern. So these are graphs from an article that I published just a short while ago, looking at the percentage of bills introduced in the United States Congress that have something to do with immigration, and the news coverage that you see in newspapers and in media outlets around the country. And you see a striking increase in the amount of coverage and concern about immigration. Here's one reason why. The irony of immigration policy is that in 1986, when the last major immigration reform occurred, the bill that was structured had a deep contradiction at its core. And the contradiction was that, of course, Americans were told that they were getting a piece of legislation that would allow laws to be strictly enforced. But in fact, the bill was written in some respects to fail. It had a cumbersome immigration enforcement system domestically. It created a paper-based system that almost nobody could easily comply with, even lawyers. I would tell you personally, it's quite difficult, and I teach this stuff. It contrasted sharply with other areas of law that I've studied and written about, like aviation security or the way the CDC monitors public health information around the country, in that nobody has an incentive in the immigration context to report accurate information, and the law itself actually prevents law enforcement officials from enforcing the law very effectively. The one exception to that has been on the border, where, because in some respects particular organized interests don't have the same burden that they would face if immigration enforcement were stricter domestically, very large increases in enforcement have occurred. Just to give you one example, in about 25 years, the number of Border Patrol agents on the southern border has gone from 2,500 to about 22,000. If immigration reforms pass in Congress, under the Senate bill, that number would go to 60,000. What about the economic impacts of immigration? This is a subtle and complicated area, but we know a good deal, for example, about the impact of immigration on innovation. There's some good econometric work that's been done showing that states and jurisdictions that have larger numbers of immigrants actually end up filing for more patents, and that's if you control for all kinds of other factors that might confound the study. If you look at incomes, you see a very interesting pattern, and this is particularly interesting research because it looks like at both legal and undocumented immigration. The pattern is that about 9 out of 10 Americans have seen their incomes rise because of immigration, in part because immigration brings innovation, in part because immigrant workers don't duplicate exactly the skills of American workers. But it's important to recognize that as with trade policy, there are both winners and losers. And if you look at the demographic that involves people who have not finished even a high school education, their incomes have likely declined because of immigration, complicating the politics of the issue. This man is Lyndon Johnson. He was the president of the United States when the 1965 immigration reform bill was passed, the reason a lot of us who are immigrants came to the United States. And it's interesting to note that when he was president, he gave a speech about the law. He said, effectively, those who can contribute most to this country will be the first that are admitted. Innovation is an important theme in our discussion today. And I can tell you that in immigration, the need for innovation is clear in as much as we've learned that the way the law was structured in 1965 has not always made it easy for people to navigate the system. And for many immigrants, it looks a lot more like this. Scientists and entrepreneurs who get a degree from Stanford, who get a temporary H-1B visa, learn to be entrepreneurs, want to stay in the US, are told simply there's not a visa and they might move to India or they might move to China or they might move somewhere else. 20-year backlogs exist even for people that are told by the system that a visa ought to be there for them. There are implications for trade, education, investment, and so on. So let me just close by making 2 observations. The first is that we have a great deal of knowledge about how to fix this. Many people, including people at Stanford, have written about the benefits of focusing more on the immigration economics connection, about trying to build a reasonable system for dealing with the fact that if the country is not going to spend $250 billion to remove all the undocumented immigrants, they ought to be in the system in some way, about building in flexibility to the immigration system so that authorities can adjust the number of visas depending on economic conditions. And recently, the US Senate passed a bipartisan bill that does all of this. But what's the other challenge? The other challenge is that despite the fact that a majority of Americans support these kinds of reforms, it's likely that they will not get through Congress. And this brings me to the last point that I want to make, which is about how issues like immigration interact with the national electoral context and with institutions. And in particular here, I'll highlight the way districts work in the US Congress. The district boundaries that determine the districts that elect members of the House of Representatives are drawn by politicians. Not surprisingly, those districts are often designed to create very safe districts. And the result is that it's very hard sometimes for some members of Congress to do things that would perhaps reflect what the majority of the country might want to do, but would require them to make an explanation to their district, which has been drawn to be quite polarized. So ultimately, the question that I leave you with is not only how do we innovate in immigration, because I think we've done so, but how do we innovate in the way we govern ourselves? Thank you very much.